Welcome to another edition of Crime Time with DutyRon. I'm a retired New York City police detective with 20 plus years of law enforcement. And guys and girls, if you like all things true crime related from a police perspective, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you will get all things DutyRon when I go live or upload another video. Today, we're going to talk about the hunt for Brian Laundrie. We had much breaking news here today. We have a lot to talk about. But before we get into that, I want to say thank you to my Patreon supporters, the channel members, and all of the folks who positively interact, the subscribers in the live streams, in the chat, and down below in the comment section. I also love my replay viewers. Thank you so much to the replay viewers. You guys are an instrumental part of the success of Crime Time with DutyRon. And before I get into my guests, I have two wonderful guests. I will introduce them after I play a quick bit of media. I want you guys to see the short FBI press conference that was held at the Reserve today, where all of the activity went. And we are going to take questions at the end of this live stream. So if you hang around and hold your questions until the end, we will take questions and we will talk about the ongoings of today. But as you can see from the title of this video, we are going to get into the forensic psychology side of Brian Laundrie and various other criminals. We talked last night about Larry Miliete being arrested. So we're going to talk about quite a few different things here in this show, but we are going to talk about the activities of today. So I'm going to play a quick piece of media. We're going to get right into it, and I'll be right back.
Now, immediately after the press conference.
Very good. Good afternoon, Josh Taylor with the Northport Police Department. Thank you for your continued diligence on this story, and thanks for your patience. As you know, the Northport Police Department has worked collaboratively with the FBI throughout this investigation. Special Agent Michael McPherson is going to make a prepared statement. There's not going to be any questions today, but hopefully it answers some of them. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael McPherson. I'm the Special Agent in charge of the FBI Tampa Division. As you're aware, the FBI and the Northport Police Department and our state and local law enforcement partners have been searching the area of the Carlton Reserve for Brian Laundrie, a person of interest in the murder of Gabby Petito. Earlier today, investigators found what appears to be human remains, along with personal items such as a backpack and notebook belonging to Brian Laundrie. These items were found in an area that up until recently have been underwater. Our evidence response team is on scene using all available forensic resources to process the area. It's likely the team will be on scene for several days. I know you have a lot of questions, but we don't have all the answers yet. We are working diligently to get those answers for you. We are grateful for the dedication and professionalism of the Northport Police Department, along with our partners from the state and local agencies. Complex investigations such as this cannot be accomplished by one agency alone, but there's just too many agencies to name them all here today. Portions of the Myakkahatchee Creek Environment Park and Carlton Reserve will remain closed to the public until further notice. This is an active and ongoing investigation, so we ask the public to maintain distance from any law enforcement personnel, equipment, vehicles, and other related activity for the safety of the public and to protect the integrity of our work. We have no additional comment related to today's activities. Our FBI Denver office is the lead investigative agency, and all future inquiries should be directed to them. We appreciate the tremendous support from the public and continue to ask for your assistance in bringing this investigation to close. Thank you.
Was the backpack found near the body? Justice for Gabby!
Okay, so they went on to start chanting justice for Gabby after that. We're going to continue on with our program, and that was the brief FBI press conference. Don't forget the Denver office is lead FBI on this case. Before we get into it, I want to introduce my first guest. She is a clinical criminal forensic psychologist and a private investigator. Dr. Joni Johnston is kind enough to join us here from California, and I greatly appreciate you coming on to give us some of your expertise, Joni. Thank you and welcome to the show.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Hey, it is my pleasure. We've tried to do this quite a few times. On the third strike, we were able to get it accomplished. Just for the viewers that are joining, Doctor has her own YouTube channel. It's called Unmasking a Murderer. And I'm going to link that down below. She has a fascinating YouTube channel. She is a wealth of information. And I wanted to bring her on about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. And we had a couple of snafus that gone on. And also, Gabby Petito was recovered on one of the nights that we were going to get together. And it's just very coincidental that we have her on here tonight. And potentially we have some human remains. We don't know, again, if it's Brian Laundrie, but we will find out in the days to come. Joining me as my co-host, he's no slouch, Ed Wallace, retired New York City Police Detective, first grade, crime scene investigator, a forensic expert. Ed, welcome. Thank you for joining twice in one day.
Yes, good to be here. Hello,
Yeah.
Doctor.
Hello.
So I want to start with you, Doc. If you can, please give a little bit of background for the audience. Everyone that's joining has never seen you before. Give them the lowdown on Dr. Joni Johnston.
Well, you gave a little bit of introduction, so I won't repeat myself too much, but I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist, as you said earlier, and a private investigator, although I do mainly forensic psychology work. And what I do most often is I evaluate offenders who are up for parole or who are part of a criminal investigation or defense. And I evaluate their mental state, I evaluate their violence risk, and then provide opinions to the court about whether I think the person is safe either to be released into the community, if they're competent to stand trial, or if they are mentally unfit for trial, or if they're a candidate for an insanity plea.
That's fascinating. So you get an opportunity to see face to face at certain times these violators, these criminals. You get a chance to interview them and have conversations. Just trying to give the audience a little feel for what you have done or what you do.
I do, and I actually worked inside of a maximum security prison for a couple of years, so I really got an up close and personal chance to interact with a lot of different inmates during that period of time as well.
Well, that's fascinating. I want to just jump right into it. Let's just cut to the chase. What's your take on Brian Laundrie going from day one to present? I'd like to know what your feeling is. I know you had a chance to look over this case. Everybody wants to know what a clinical and a criminal psychologist has to say about Brian Laundrie.
And let me, I guess, say a couple of maybe caveats at the beginning, because I have never met Brian Laundrie. I've never met Gabby Petito. So I think it's important to point that out, because typically when I give an opinion or do an evaluation, I'm sitting down face to face with that person. And I have a chance not only to talk to that person, I also have access a lot of times to their records. So I want to make sure that I'm really upfront about that. The other thing I'll say is it's very difficult in these situations not to play Monday morning quarterback. You know, we can look at the video in the Moab situation. We can look at things that have happened, and it's very hard to not to kind of go, we know the ending to this story, at least in terms of Gabby. And so it's hard not to then take that ending and filter it onto all these other things. So having said that, I think I'd like to talk about domestic violence in terms of the domestic violence that may have gone on between Gabby and Brian and other domestic violence perpetrators that I've seen over the years. And there are definitely some parallels there. I mean, watching the video, for example, there were a lot of red flags that, a police officer might not have seen, but that looking at this video, you do see this kind of disparity in terms of how upset Gabby was versus how upset Brian was. You have somebody calling 911 and reporting that a male is hitting a female, and then you see Gabby taking a lot of responsibility, really all the responsibility for what is going on. And that's one of the hard things, I think, whenever law enforcement or anybody is called to a situation involving some kind of domestic violence, it's so hard to understand and know the context of that relationship. and know what was going on ahead of time. So witnesses have come forward, friends of Gabby's have come forward and described Brian as somebody who was controlling of Gabby, jealous of Gabby, very possessive of Gabby, in many ways very emotionally dependent upon her. And that is very consistent with many domestic violence perpetrators that I've seen, because there's this paradox where on the one hand, this person may be very mean in some ways, very controlling, very critical, and yet there's this incredible emotional attachment to that person. It's almost like, you know, I'm going to be the boss. I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm going to control your life, but you can't leave me. You can never leave me. I have to make sure I know where you are all the time. And so some of the things that people have said who knew that relationship are very consistent with what I've seen and people that I've talked to, both victims as well as perpetrators.
You know, and you and I had an opportunity to speak a little bit before we went live, and we talked about the close quarters. This young 22 and 23-year-old couple were traveling across the United States in a small little van. When you have a little bit of a disagreement, or say some little quirks that you might have in a regular home environment where you both can go to either sides of the house, you can kind of blow off steam. In this situation here, there was really nowhere to go other than to walk out in the wilderness. So it made this situation and that component of not being able to escape it. And but Gabby, a young 22-year-old girl, is not going to now just walk off in the middle of the night if they have an argument and say, oh, I'm just going to go take a walk in the middle of a pitch black wilderness. So
I think you're absolutely right, Ron. I mean, there are two things that kind of come to mind here immediately. One is, you're right, that in that situation, she's probably going to feel even more dependent upon Brian, and that relationship is going to make it harder for her to get away. And also, to some extent, that environment is a pressure cooker.
Right.
There's not a lot of space for either one of them. And so if you have somebody who may have had these, you know, predisposing personality traits, predisposing relationship patterns, it's almost like putting this pot on a, on a boiler and turning the heat on.
Right. And Ed, you and I spoke about many times the Moab incident on the 12th of August. The police were called not by Gabby and not by Brian, who were called by complete strangers. Two different individuals observed behavior that was not correct. And we heard the one caller, Chris, tell the police that, you know, it just seemed concerning and I saw something and I made the phone call. Talk about what, Ed, if you can, for the audience, a little bit about when we go to domestic violence calls and what happens afterwards with the main aggressor. And I feel that in this case, the primary aggressor was shadowed by Gabby. And this happens quite often in domestic violence situations. The woman will take the blame or the brunt for it, and in hopes of keeping him happy and saying, hey, I said I was the one who was doing this. But we talked about what our feelings were after that. And the pressure cooker was boiling at that point, and fast forward to where we were. You got any thoughts on that, Ed?
Yeah, so as I said previously, in New York, back in the 80s and 90s, we used to try to mediate the disputes, the domestic violence. If there was true assaults and so forth, then, you know, we would make arrests where necessary. But in most cases, if it was just all loud arguments and no real battery occurring, we would try to mediate this. But then later on, what would happen is things would escalate after we left, and then a true assault would occur or a homicide would occur. So the New York State legislature changed the law and made it mandatory for us to identify the aggressor and lock them up, and then remove them from that situation and put them in jail overnight to give them a cooling down period and protect the victim of the assault. So in New York, it's mandatory. We don't have any discretion. We try to identify who the aggressor is in the incident, and if we can, we lock them up. And then sometimes during these incidents, they'll start pointing fingers at each other, saying he was the aggressor there, or she was the aggressor, and so forth and so on. And you can't figure it out. In that case, both people get arrested and separated and spend the night in jail.
Yeah, and in this case here, obviously we can't Monday morning quarterback. They spent over an hour with both of these folks, and you know, it's a hard call to make, because you don't have a lot of time to sit further and do evaluations. But you know, shoulda, coulda, woulda, we could do this all day long, but we're not going to do that. The reason I put this up here is because I wanted folks to see, and I wanted you, Doctor, to just take a peek at his interaction. And I'm just only going to play this audio part here with the officers. And it gives you a feel of how controlling he really is he shifted the whole thing onto her. And he told these officers, I'm not sure if this is the exact clip, but he basically told the officers that, I was just trying to control her. So I want to just play that just so the audience can hear this audio.
I know to keep her rings, the phone, and I was holding on to the keys because I didn't want to go anywhere. And my big fear is, I don't have my phone. I don't have a phone, so she goes off without me. All right, I'm on my own. So
he was saying there, I don't have my phone. She goes off on me, and I'm basically on my own. Pretty much putting all of the onus on Gabby here, and planting that seed in these officers' mind is that, like, hey, she's gone off on me, and I was just pushing her away. Fast forward, here we are today. We know Gabby was murdered, and the person of interest, I don't even like to use it, the suspect numero uno is right before us, right here on the grand stage. Now, a lot of folks would argue and say, hey, they should have let him go to the wilderness and let her go to the battered woman's or battered shelter, the victim services that they provide for the person who's the victim, and they made him to be the victim. But that would, in my eyes, we don't have a crystal ball, and we don't know what would have been the outcome. But Doc, I wanted to just see if you had an opportunity, and I don't want to take our valuable time up and play this scumbag. I don't want to play his stuff. So I would ask, if you did watch some of this body cam footage, what was your takeaway of how he was acting with those police officers?
Well, he certainly seemed very different than Gabby did, and that in and of itself is kind of alarming. If it's a dispute or an argument, you would expect both individuals to be upset, and yet you have one person who's incredibly distressed, and then you have another person who seems extremely calculated in some respects in terms of bonding with the officers, laughing, making jokes. And you're right. Here's Gabby taking the blame, and here's Brian let her, and then adding on to that, yeah, it really is this crazy girlfriend that I have. That's the problem. And so I think that in and of itself is certainly of concern looking back, that you have such a discrepancy. And I think, one of the hard things is that it's to some extent human nature. When you have one person who's very upset and you have another person who's calm and cool, who do we tend to believe? We tend to look at the person who's calm and cool and collect, no matter what they're saying, if they're lying or whatever, we kind of go, well, this person's off the deep end. Nothing they say could be true because look how upset they are. When in reality, that has nothing to do with how truthful somebody's being. The level of distress does not necessarily match whether they're credible or not. And yet it is kind of understandable to some extent that people kind of go, oh, here's the person who's cool, calm, and collected. This is the person we should listen to. In spite of the fact that at least one person had said, this man is hitting this woman. That's the discrepancy. And that's the context that is so easy to forget in that situation, because you had these two individuals, one who seems to kind of be let me tell you what really happened, officers, versus somebody who said, oh, it's all me, it's not him. It's easy to get sucked into that.
Right. And Gabby, and Ed, you could correct me if I'm wrong, Gabby was not, she was taking the blame for it. She was not even saying, look, at one point she said he grabbed my face, and then she said, oh, I guess he could have hit me. She wasn't even clear and concise, but she was upset. She was the one who was crying. She was visibly shaken by the interaction, because we get nervous. To this day, if I get pulled over by a police officer and I'm retired, I know I have my credentials on me and I'm going to be somewhat okay, but my heart starts to pound. So there's a level of anxiety that happens automatically when you get stopped by the police, no matter what. But Brian took his craft and he used it on these two officers or four officers, and he worked his magic, because from interviewing, and Ed, we all know on different levels, when you're interviewing someone who's narcissistic, who's exhibits all of the, I don't know all the clinical words, but when you have someone who's a very good controller and is a good storyteller, it can get you to believe their bullshit that they're telling you. And that's what he did here. I feel like he painted a pretty picture to these guys and was like, hey, I'm just trying to get her to calm down, and they bought it. We can't go back and turn the hands of time, But you know, again, we fast forward to today, and I feel like there's so much. I could spend hours with you, Doctor, talking about the mindset of criminals. But I don't feel, and Ed, you'll agree with me, I think, that Brian was a career criminal, but he was definitely a conniving fella that could really tell a story and maybe, you know, get his point across that he wasn't the bad guy and it was her. So
Yeah, it was apparent that he was a manipulator.
yeah.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes. It
Not
definitely
only
was.
was he manipulating Gabby, he manipulated these police officers. And I'm sure that over the course of time, we heard from girlfriends of Gabby and friends from back in over in Blue Point, Long Island, where they grew up, that, you know, he was quite different in high school, but now he's thin, he's an adventurer, he's out there and able to live somewhat off the grid. I think that, you know, this cross-country whirlwind tour took its toll on, you know, both of them, but he, you know, it's clear and apparent who the aggressor was right up until the last day at that restaurant when he exhibited his behavior inside that restaurant over a bill, allegedly, over a paying the bill at the end. He was upset at the price, and Gabby kept coming in, and she right up until the end was playing the fixer. Hey, I'm sorry for his activities and the way he's acting, to maybe not have the police come again. And this shows for me a clear, you know, this is, you know, his MO. This is what he is doing over the course of time.
Certainly at this point is happening. And the fact that it's happening publicly is very scary, because so much intimate partner violence or domestic violence occurs behind closed doors.
Right.
And you kind of wonder if this is going on out in public where other people can see it. What's going on when other people are not around?
Absolutely, Doc. Hey, Ed, I want to go and shift gears a little bit about today, because everybody is chomping at the bit here. We had quite a bit of activity. You and I were both doing our regular professional lives during the day, and we met in the middle, and you called me, I texted you, we got back and forth. The parents, Roberta and Chris Laundrie, notifies the FBI last night on the 19th. Hey, we're going to go to this reserve, and I'm not going to butcher up the name anymore, so I'm not even going to say it, but we're going to the reserve, and we are going to search for our son. Coincidental that they notify FBI? We don't know. Did the FBI meet them there? Did they camp there overnight? There's so many questions. I'm looking at the chat. People feel that the Laundries planted these items of interest. And this is all speculation, and us as professionals will never go there. But when people ask me privately, DutyRon, what do you think? Is it possible? Anything is possible. You know, I never thought that the World Trade Center would get attacked and knocked down in a gazillion years. And that happened. And it's hard to use that analogy, but people have, you know, now ask me, hey, you know, what's your thoughts on it? And I would have never thought that that would happen.
I agree. I mean, I was there in '93, and I didn't think I'd be back in 2001.
Right.
But get to your point, though. If they called the FBI and said, hey, we're going to be there. Now, why wasn't the FBI there? Did they farm this out to the local law enforcement agencies? And and it appears like there may have been one or two law enforcement officers that were there to meet them. And initially they were together, but then the law enforcement officers that were there got separated from them. And that's when they found this bag. They should have never been left alone. They should have never been allowed to search by themselves. There should have been one law enforcement with each of them, because I see in the news that it was reported that the father went off with the two law enforcement officers in one direction, and the mother went by herself in another direction. And then the father came out from the bushes and left the two law enforcement there and met up with the wife. And then they went on and continued searching by themselves. And that's when they found the bag and the notebook and so forth. They should have never been left alone, and they should have been instructed that if you find something, don't touch it, can't call us, or you know, they wouldn't have to do that if the law enforcement officers were with them at all times.
And correct me if I'm wrong, crime scene and evidence preservation 101, they broke all the rules today.
Absolutely.
I have to call that out because I was watching Fox News, the foxnews.com app that you shared with me today, Ed. And not that I didn't believe you, but when you told me that Roberta and Chris Laundrie, the parents of Brian Laundrie, were looking in an evidence bag, I didn't believe you.
Well, they found it. They found it. They picked it up from its original location. So we don't even know where that is now because they moved it and it wasn't photographed in situ. It wasn't processed by a crime scene person, wasn't measured where it was found. And they were holding it. The parents were holding it and then went to the law enforcement officers with it. And apparently, based on the media reports, she found something that was outside of the bag, opened the bag and placed that item in the bag, which wasn't in there originally. Okay, so in terms of crime scene 101, a lot of evidence could have been destroyed, and the officer then took possession of the bag from the mother without gloved hands. I mean,
yeah, this image that I'm showing the folks, sorry, Ed, the top right square is Roberta with the red backpack. And there was questions people sending into DutyRon.com. And by the way, chatters, thank you so much. There's over 3,600 live chatters here. Thank you guys for being patient. We're going to do a Q&A, I promise, at the end. Hopefully the great doctor can stay for some Q&A. And Ed, I know Ed is always down for Q&A. But viewers, I'm going to go full screen with this. I want you guys to see top right as you're looking at your screen or your device, Brian Laundrie's items located. This is what Ed is talking about. There is a officer or some type of official, or I don't know who he is has a white bag in between the two Laundrie, mom and dad, and he's showing them items that are in there. Ed,
actually, she's showing him. Ron, she's showing him. She's in possession of that bag.
Wow. That's insanity. I'm going to see if I can get a clip of that and then just play that because I got to take a peek at that. But I don't want to waste more time on this. But yeah, I mean, this is not how evidence should be handled. And if those items of interest, now I'm going to quote the Laundrie's attorney, Stephen Bertolino. The text message from their counsel says to a news reporter, "We have found articles today by the parents, ? A white bag after a brief search." This is from the attorney. I wrote it down word for word. That's what he sent to, and that was not law enforcement release. That was released attorney straight to the media. Any thoughts on that, Ed?
Well, again, obviously the parents spoke to the attorney for the attorney to make that press release.
Right.
So they're claiming they found it, and that it belonged to their son because they looked in it and they saw the belongings. They saw the backpack, and I was looking closely at that backpack. I did an internet search, and it appears to be one that I found online that is a waterproof backpack that's used for hiking and trails and so forth.
But now a waterproof backpack, and Doc, I don't want you to get too bored here, but I want you to follow this because I'm going to lead into another question for you. The waterproof backpack, if it's underwater for 2 weeks, now they're talking about the water just recently receding here. They had a dry spell in the Tampa or that Sarasota region, and it was a miracle, according to some locals, that water never usually recedes at this time of year. A backpack, even if it was waterproof, and they say our cell phones are water resistant and they are IP68 rating, but if you drop it in the bottom of the ocean and recover it 2 weeks later, your iPhone or your Android is not going to work. I mean, that's a fact. Mm-hmm. Unless it's in like one of those life-proof cases or something like that. But I want to talk about the notepad that they allegedly recovered inside that backpack or outside the backpack. What kind of technology does the FBI crime lab have, Ed, for retrieval of any said notes that might be on? And you would say 2 weeks is soaking wet underneath the water. Is it possible?
Yes, it's possible. They'll bring it back to the laboratory, dry it out, and then thoroughly photograph and try to separate the pages, document the pages, what they can see with their naked eye. Then they can use alternate light sources to try to fluoresce the possible inks that may be left behind or may have been disturbed by the water, and try to see what was written there. That way, they can also use infrared photography to try to bring out the pigments in the ink of what was written on these pages. In addition to that, they can attempt to use indented writing techniques. You know, when you write on the top page of a notebook, you put pressure on that page with the point of your pen or your pencil, whatever the case may be, and that pressure then imprints itself on the subsequent pages beneath it. So when you move the front page that you wrote on, the indented writing is captured below on the subsequent pages. So what they can do is there's a machine in the laboratory that they can place the papers in under vacuum and introduce the particles and have the particles fill the indented writing to make visible the writing from the previous pages.
Wow, that's fascinating. Hey, Doc, I wanted to quickly ask you, and Ed, the reason I got into that is because I got tons of messages about that notepad. People are just going wild about it. And, is it going to be usable? And there is a possibility there with technology. Doc, I wanted to talk to you about the Laundrie parents, the Laundrie sister. We see she came out on her front lawn, made a statement saying that, you're scaring my children. But the Laundries have been silent from the get-go. From a clinical standpoint, I know legally, they're protecting their Fifth Amendment and their young son. But any takeaway on that type of activity of being quiet, not having any type of empathy towards the family? Does this fall into any type of categories? And I hate to ask you and put you on the spot for that.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I've thought quite a bit about this. I feel like I should put on my mom hat for just a minute, because as a mom of 4 kids who are really the ages of Gabby and Brian, I've really done quite a bit of soul searching, thinking, what would I do? How would I feel? What would I want to have happen if my son was a suspect in his girlfriend's murder? And of course, if my daughter had been murdered by her boyfriend, and it's just so complicated. So I try to give parents the benefit of the doubt in almost every situation. It is very difficult to understand the extent to which Chris and Roberta Laundrie have remained silent. I think the hardest thing for me to understand, honestly, it's not hard for me to understand as a mom wanting to protect my child. I understand that. And no matter how old and no matter the circumstances, I can understand that. It's hard for me to wrap my head around ignoring another parent's text and phone calls, frantic phone calls and texts for 11 days. That is really very difficult for me to understand because, I could not help but put myself in that situation. So that is the hardest thing for me, I think. And I have a lot of questions too, in terms of how involved have they been? How much did they know? That's the other question, is what did Brian tell them? Did he come home and say, I left Gabby out at the park? We had a fight. I don't know where she is. Or there was some horrible accident and we got into a fight and she hit her head on a rock. We don't know what he told his parents. So I'm certainly would imagine that if they were in some kind of denial about what might have happened, when the coroner said that she had been strangled, it would be much more difficult to maintain that. So that's kind of a long way of saying I have some empathy for his parents in terms of the situation that they find themselves in. Right. But it is difficult for me to, like I said, wrap my head around not, ignoring another parent for that period of time. And also, taking a step back as parents, we want our kids to be accountable and responsible for what they do. And we can love our kid. We can get our kid the best attorney. We can visit our kid. We can do all kinds of stuff. But at some point it does become, am I helping my kid emotionally as well as just practically?
Right.
By participating in his disappearance or, lack of cooperation with law enforcement.
And also, Doctor, I looked at the fact of a 23-year-old young man who was potentially getting engaged, was going to marry. They were engaged, going to marry this love of his life, the high school sweetheart, like a fairy tale kind of thing, right? But then to come home, and we have pinpointed in our minds as investigators, Ed and I have spoken about this, between the 27th and 30th is going to be somewhere in that area of the time of death for Gabby Petito. He came home on September 1st and laid his head down on a pillow for 10 going on 11 days. Northport Police Department came knocking at his door, and there was already an attorney retained. I just would be curious to hear of like what somebody would think in your field of what kind of criminal and what kind of mindset could somebody have to allegedly kill somebody and then sleep and then go camping. Sleep, camping, no mention of anything, as per his sister. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, questions. That's really what I have in this situation. I want to sit, I would love to be in a room and sit down, sit Brian's parents down and try to understand where they were coming from. I think it's so difficult. We talked about this earlier before the show started. How do you sort out the situation a person finds himself in versus who they are as a person? And it's particularly difficult here. So you kind of go, okay, is this person's survival instinct kicking in so much that they're able to do all these things and operate in this way that the rest of us kind of step back and go, how could you do this? Didn't you care about Gabby? Didn't you love her? And I think it's possible. I do think that he cared about Gabby. He also, murdered her possibly. So it's very complicated. And like I said, I have so many questions in this situation. I would love to know if this turns out to be the remains of Brian Laundrie, and this is his notebook, which it sounds like it is. What is on that? I would imagine there'd be a lot of information, hopefully about his thought processes and what he was thinking at this time. But it's unfathomable to me, like I said, that somebody could ignore the frantic phone calls and texts of another parent for 11 days. I just can't get my head around that as a psychologist and as a mom.
And points are well taken there, because we all are thinking this as parents. We're thinking this as parents, and we as law enforcement professionals, we say to ourselves, there is two sides to the story, and there's somewhere in between the truth, right? So, Ed, my question to you is this: if we have a confirmation going forward in the days to come or hours to come, we have confirmation this is the remains of Brian Laundrie recovered. What, if anything, would be going on investigative-wise with the Laundrie parents, with Roberta and Chris? Are they going to be put in the box over in Northport PD with the FBI and questioned? I know they've invoked their Fifth Amendment as well. But I would certainly hope that they would come forward and say anything or everything and anything that they have. But it just doesn't seem like they're that type. But can you give the audience a little idea of where this could go from here? Because those questions loom.
Well, as you said, they lawyered up to, so they cannot be questioned by law enforcement without them waiving their rights and the counsel present. That being said, they're being looked at every aspect, every turn. They're looking at their finances. They're looking at their cell phone records, their text records, their emails, who they're communicating with, how long they're communicating, when they were communicating, looking at all the financial records and so forth, going way back with before the domestic violence incidents, and then going forward from that point on and so forth. They still have some questions outstanding for law enforcement to get, and I'm sure law enforcement is not going to let them go if this person comes back, this body comes back to being Brian. And they'll question them, hopefully, and they'll cooperate. If they're not going to cooperate, then they can't close the case. There's no way I would close the case until I had all those dots dotted and all those I's dotted and T's crossed. And if I found something on the investigation,
you got to dot your I's, and you got to dot your I's and cross your T's. Again, I feel strongly that law enforcement's job is far from done here. And for those of you who are in the chat, and thank you for the super chats coming in. I saw a $50 super chat come in from Anna, Lily's mom. Thank you. She says, why not answer Gabby's family calls and text messages and emails? Why lawyer up? And these are all questions that we all have. I don't believe it was Brian who retained the lawyer, which means the mother and father had knowledge. Let me just highlight that, because Anna, that is a great statement right there. And you know what? I spoke about this weeks ago when this was first starting out. So I'm going to highlight that on there. And I love the pup. I hope that's one of your little precious pets there. We love our animals over here on Crime Time at DutyRon. But Anna, I couldn't agree with you anymore. As a parent, as a human being, I say to myself, you know, how could you not answer the phone calls of this girl's family, the parents? She lived with you for over 2 years. So this makes it even a special kind of evil and despicable in my eyes. And it's a really tough pill to swallow in feeling any empathy for them, because when you look at this and you look at the grand scheme of things, you know, as parents, I would be banging on that door. I would actually ram that door down if it was me. I'm not saying people go and do this. Please don't take it that way. I'm just saying if it was my daughter, that's what kind of I would be outraged if I didn't get a phone call. But again, you know, cooler heads will prevail, and we have to act human here. But it is just it points to, and I think that a lot of people question and say, why is everybody so angry? Well, when you are not acting in a proper way and you're not making the proper, you know, effort to come forward and say, hey, listen, I think there's a problem. My son came home without Gabby, and I think you need to come over and we need to talk. That didn't happen. The lawyer got retained, and here we are in present day. I know that there's a lot of questions, and I know there's a lot of questions in the chat. We're into 42 minutes. This has gone by so quickly, but I wanted to throw it over quickly to Ed on this evidence collection, these items. What they didn't give us anything about the items, but again, where do these items go now? Do they take them to Quantico? Are they in local FBI storage? What kind of analysis, what kind of process goes on with that backpack and anything else? And these body parts and the recovery, you know, we talked about anthropologists, we talked about odontologists. Is that all on the plate and on the table for this again?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the key things that happened earlier today is they brought canine cadaver dogs. So from that, I'm guessing that we don't have an intact body, and there may be some scattering of body by the indigenous wildlife down there. And so now they're looking for all the parts of the body with using the dogs. In addition, that backpack and all its contents will go to Quantico, to the laboratory, because the FBI doesn't do anything in the field. They'll pack it all up, ship it up there. They'll document everything thoroughly to give it a full look. They'll look for hairs and fibers. They'll look for trace transfer evidence, fingerprints, DNA. They'll try to confirm that, in fact, it is Brian's belongings. They'll get a DNA exemplar. If they don't already have it, I believe they do have it, and then eliminate any other source of who this could belong to. And we should get that information in relatively short time. In the meantime, the pathologists are going to work on that body or the remains and get a cause and manner of death. And they'll do ID as well. So they'll do either, depending, again, if it was underwater for several days or weeks or whatever the case may be, I would expect to see some sort of adiposia, again, the grave wax on the skin. That may affect them with the ability to do a facial identification. That may affect them their ability to get fingerprints. So then we would revert back to DNA and dental to try to identify who this person is. And we should get the dental back relatively shortly, as opposed to the DNA, which could take a couple of days to a week.
Right. And you know, folks don't, a lot of the folks in the chat, they don't really have a good grasp of this process. And you had the advantage of working with Dr. Barbara Butcher over at the Chief Medical Examiner's Office in New York City. For those of you who are joining, there's over 5,200 in the chat live here now. Ed Wallace is a retired crime scene investigator. He is a forensics expert. And up in my top right corner is Dr. Joni Johnston. She's a clinical and criminal psychologist, a forensic psychologist. She gets into the minds of these criminals, and she has quite a few books that she has written. I don't know if you want to talk about that at this point because we're getting ready to close up. Give everybody a little bit of idea what you got, and I'm going to show some of your stuff on the screen.
Well, my most recent book, which I'll mention, is called Serial Killers, 101 Questions True Crime Fans Ask. And I wrote that book because I write a blog for Psychology Today, and I get a lot of amazing questions from my readers. And so over the years, I collected them. And then when COVID hit, I had the opportunity to sit down and kind of go, maybe I should actually answer all those questions in one place so people can find them. So that's the book that's the most recent and the one that I'm the most excited about. And there, as you can see on the screen, is my channel, which I need to get better at being more consistent about, but I really, really do enjoy it and have some great people who visit it regularly and give me such great feedback and suggestions. I'm always open for people to write in and say, would you cover this case? Let's talk about this case from a forensic. So I like to cover the case, but also then talk about it from a psychological standpoint.
I have your permission to play this little trailer. I'm sorry, I removed myself. I gave you the full show. You were like, wait a minute,
Sure.
did everybody just leave me? Did everybody just go home? Do I have your permission to play your trailer? I'm showing all of your stuff. I wanted to play this trailer for everybody.
Sure.
Okay, here we go. We're gonna go full screen, and we're gonna put the sound on.
Welcome to Unmasking a Murder, a show about the psychology of crime. I'm Dr. Joni Johnston, a clinical and forensic psychologist, private investigator, and true crime writer. I've been interested in the criminal mind ever since I read Helter Skelter, a book about Charles Manson and his cult while on vacation with my family at age 14. The goal of this show is to go behind what happened and take a look at why it happened. I hope to bring my experience in prisons, jails, and forensic hospitals, along with the available research and compelling cases, to explore murder, why it happens, how it happens, and what we can do to prevent it.
That is an awesome trailer. I love it. I love it, Doc. Yeah, great. Let me add Ed back in. I implore everyone to go over to her YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button like I did, and hit the bell. So this way you will get all things true crime related from Dr. Joni Johnston. And I'm going to show you. Look, boom. DutyRon is subscribed, and I also hit the bell, all notifications.
Awesome.
So I'm looking for you. The pressure's on, Doc. You better get your butt in gear and start.
I know. I will. I promise. This has been a motivator for me.
Yes. And listen, I'm hoping that all 5,000 people go over and subscribe and knock your channel up to 50,000 before you know it. Ed, I wanted to take some questions from the audience, and I hope Dr. Johnston, I hope you have some time.
I do.
It's going to take us about 5 minutes, 10 minutes to get to some of these questions. So let me just say hello to everyone in the chat quickly. I'm going to go full screen with me, yours truly. If by a show of hands, who enjoyed the conversation with Ed and Dr. Johnston, please let us know. Joni is a really, really wonderful human being. She's got a wealth of information. Thank you, Jennifer, for subscribing to her channel. Let me know by putting a 1 in the chat if you enjoyed this conversation tonight. We're going to have more of these type of conversations about Brian Laundrie. In the days to come, a lot will be happening. So if you have any questions for both of my guests, please put it in the chat at this time and let me know. I will highlight it and we will put it out there for you. And I'm going to look back at some of the super chats and see. Thank you, Anna, for sending a reply back. She replied back, yes, that's my Lily. I could go quickly and identify. She could go quickly and identify humans from animal bones and remains. So she's a service dog and she's out there. Wow, fantastic. All right, let me get to the chat and see. This chat is moving so fast right now. I'm going to add everybody back. Hi, guys. Okay, woo, we're up close. That was too close. So the chat is moving quickly and I don't see any questions. So everybody, maybe they're just a little bit on delay. And here's one from Mystery Maven. At DutyRon, could you ask Ed about my super chat. Ed, question: if remains consist of lower body, how do they identify DNA? Question mark. And how long does that take? Thank you, Mystery Maven, and thank you for being a channel member and a subscriber and Patreon supporter.
Well, if there's any skin, muscle, tissue left, they can go that route. If they can always tap into the bone and go that route as well to get the DNA.
Outstanding. Thank you for that. Here's one for Dr. Johnny. Johnny. What do I call? What do I?
Joni.
Joni.
Like Joni and Chachi.
Yeah,
Yep.
Joni.
Yeah, that's the cue.
Okay, so here we go. Joni, Dr. Joni Johnston. Here we go. Why do psychologists say pedos are safe for release when they go up for release? Question mark. And I don't know that they always say that. Of course, they don't pay. Their prey isn't there. Of course, they don't. Their prey isn't there.
That's a really interesting. That is a really interesting question because let me say a couple of different things about that. It's a pretty comprehensive evaluation to say somebody is safe for release. I tend to deal in the world of criminals who have some kind of mental health history, and pedophilia does fall into that. And so we can't just say a person is not safe for release just based on their crime. That is a huge part of it, but that's a starting block. And so the fact that somebody has a history of pedophilia is going to raise the bar in terms of what we're looking for in terms of that person be released. So we have to look at a whole bunch of different risk factors. I would also say that a lot of times they're not released or they're committed for civil treatment, at least here in California. So I want to make sure that's clear, but it is very comprehensive. And a lot of times what they'll do is at a certain point, if they meet these criteria, they will also put a lot of restrictions and a lot of monitoring in place for a long period of time to ensure that as much as possible that the person is safe. But I definitely appreciate your concern because we all want our children to be protected. Right. And when we have somebody who has committed a crime against children, we want to be very, very diligent as psychologists and as citizens to make sure they're going to be safe going forward.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for that comprehensive response. And a lot of times we don't hear about the ones that are not released. We hear about the ones that are released. And that's why it's great that you answered that question. The next one is for Ed, talking about what's the reason, Ed, that the cadaver dogs, those human remains detection dogs, were on scene yesterday. They didn't get a scent from the water earlier in this area. So that's the question. They're asking you why they wouldn't have gotten a scent from the water searches earlier.
Well, it depends how thorough that search was with the cadaver dogs. Were they in boats on that water, or were they were they there when the water was there? Because I'm not aware of that. If they were, because what a lot of the vehicles I saw in there were big ATVs and high water type vehicles, and that wouldn't be beneficial for a dog to be used in that environment. The dog needs to be close to the surface of the water in order to potentially get a scent off the water from a decomposing body that's off-gassing underneath the water and rising to the top.
I think Jamie's question came because the news showed the boats driving with the dogs in them, like those, I don't know what they would call them, those assault, they got the big tires and they run through the muck. I don't remember the term for that vehicle, but they had the dogs in the front of it. There was a dark colored dog in one of the news clips, and they kept showing it over and over again.
But was it in that specific area?
It was in that, not exactly that area itself. It's huge location, 25,000 square acres or 25,000 acres. But yeah, I mean, there's a multitude of answers to that, and we don't really have access to the full case file. So a lot of people are asking you, Doctor, about the family dynamic, the Laundrie family dynamic, including the sister Cassie. I think I asked you about this earlier, and you did kind of respond. It's not really, she doesn't have the advantage of interviewing this family, so it's hard for her to give a professional opinion on them. But thank you for that question.
It is hard, and I appreciate those questions. I have so many questions myself, not only about what has happened since Gabby went missing, but I also have a ton of questions about what they saw in the 2 years that Gabby and Brian lived with them. And I think that if we had more information about that, it would be a lot easier to answer some questions about what has happened since then.
Yeah, very good. I just saw a great question, and I got to find it. Hold on a second. Give me 2 seconds. It was about Brian. Um, I hate when that happens. So basically, it was asking about Brian's past history, if it's indicative of what we have present, like from his high school days. Is the question? I didn't get to read the whole thing, but I think basically what they were saying is could there be some type of documentation from when he was going through high school to present day, with his mental state or things of that nature?
Well, certainly another really good question. And we touched on it a little bit recently or a little bit earlier, in that we've had some people who've known them for a while come forward and describe some of the dynamics between the two of them that are concerning. I didn't see a lot of people come forward and say, yeah, I saw Brian hit Gabby in high school, or I saw Brian hit Gabby a year ago, or whatever. So that piece of the puzzle is missing for me, at least. But we did hear other people talk about the dynamics of their relationship and this kind of coercive control that we often see in domestic violence situations, and the fact that he was very jealous and possessive and controlling. And I know that Gabby's best friend, for example, related a story of when the two of them were supposed to go out, and he had, at least according to this woman,
Right.
he had hid her ID and her credit cards. And that is something that you would not expect most boyfriends to do. No matter how they felt about their girlfriend going out and line dancing, they
Right.
probably would not tend to, take their stuff and hide it. So there were definitely some red flags there, I think, in terms of their relationship beforehand. And then, as you talked about, Ron, you take this scenario of two people together who already, Brian was exhibiting these red flags or these warning signs, and then it becomes, even more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, very good question and very great answer, because it's given a lot of different parts of the whole dynamic of it. This one's for you, Ed. It's about the decomposition in the water. So Kristen McHenry says, at DutyRon, what kind of decomp can happen when a body has been in the water for 30 to 60 days? And I think we're really looking at a time frame here, potentially of around 3 to 4 weeks. So it wouldn't be 60 days out, but definitely 30. What's your thoughts on that, Ed?
Well, as I said earlier, anytime you have a body that's submerged or lying in water, they're and decomping at the same time, a dead body, there's a reaction that occurs with the skin and the tissue. It's called adiposia. It's also known as grave wax. And if you look at the white to gray, chalky, kind of soapy appearance that happens to the skin as it stays in that moist environment, and it could degrade the fingerprints, the friction-ridged tissue on the fingers, palms of your soles, and your toes, and so forth, and make that almost impossible to obtain fingerprints. And it's just a different. It's the opposite of mummification, if you will. And if you touch these bodies in the wrong way, you can damage the bodies even further, because it'll slide right off the bone.
Right. And Barbara talked in detail about that when we broke down the Gabby Petito autopsy and the results. Here's one for Doctor. Here we go. Kathy Garrett says, getting into the mind of Brian, do you think he killed Gabby intentionally, or he snapped and killed her accidentally? Thank you for that question. That's a great one, Kathy.
Yeah, that is such a good question. I've thought about that a lot, because one of the things that I think surprised me a little bit was the fact that there was some evidence that he had gone home before the September first trip, and that they had these problems in August, or the police had been called in August, and he had actually traveled home and gone back. Because I think I was hoping and thinking that maybe if they had taken some time away from each other, that this pressure cooker would resolve itself a little bit, or at least cool off. And maybe it did for a few days, but it certainly sounds like the minute he got back, things escalated and got worse. So I think I want to say yes to both of those. And what I mean by it is this, is we see this progression of him becoming, it seems like, more, angry,
Agitated.
more agitated. He's, there's this incident August 12th, and, later on at this restaurant, he's berating people and, in public, the people who work there. People are seeing Gabby upset. So it looks like there is this escalation in terms of his behavior for a couple of weeks at least, if not longer during that. So that implies some kind of slow or relatively slow process of him escalating. Yeah. And at the same time, I would also say my sense or my guess, and this is a guess, even though I hope it's an educated one, is that perhaps this argument that was at this restaurant may have resulted in things escalating and him killing her on the spot then. So I think if that makes any sense, I'm saying yes to both of those. I definitely think there was this progression and there was an opportunity for intervention along this path. I think you're watching these videos. I felt like I was watching a slow murder take place to some extent, you know, when you look at this escalation in behavior when it goes together. But I do think the actual murder itself probably took place during an argument,
right,
or in a situation like that.
And it's alleged that that was the 27th when that whole restaurant, that last meal, so to speak, it was a Tex-Mex place. So that could have very well have been the trigger, if you will, that set this whole thing off. Thank you, Doc, for that great response. Here's one for you, Ed, and this is coming in. I've taken this question a whole host of times, and this goes out to the two females who were shot and killed around 2 days later after the 12th. I think it was the 13th. Yeah, it was like the 14th or the 15th. They were shot and killed. Any thoughts on that question, Ed? Can you see that?
Yeah, I see it. But what I would say with that is they would have to get the ballistics evidence from the murder victims and understand what the caliber, make and model of the gun used in that. And then they would have to do a search to see if Brian owned that type of gun. I'm going to stick strictly with the forensics. I'm not going to speculate on that. But if Brian owned that kind of gun, then you'd think that the law enforcement officers would then try to find that gun if it was in the household and get a warrant for that gun. If it's in the household, speak to the parents and the lawyer and say, is this gun in this household? And try to get a warrant to get their hands on it if he did in fact possess the weapon that was of the same caliber and manufacturer as that found in the ballistics evidence of those two victims.
And you and I both know that the Moab police, the detectives, and whoever supplemented that case ruled out Brian Laundrie. And however they were able to rule him out, maybe there was a bunch of other evidence that would point to another suspect.
Exactly.
This is rapid fire. Huda Ali is coming in with a great question. His paintings, his dark thoughts, we've seen them all on his internet profile on his social media. I don't know if you've seen it. It was escalating for a while. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think we have some evidence that it was escalating, at least during this trip, for sure. And that's evidence that directly comes from what we know about Brian's behavior. I will say that as a forensic psychologist, there have been many psychological tests in the past that relied on drawings and things like that to create psychological profiles. And the research has been pretty disappointing. So we know that even though people can draw really scary pictures, and of course what we draw reflects to some extent what we're thinking, I'm always very hesitant to look at a drawing and kind of go, okay, this is a picture of the devil. This means this person is a devil or a devil worshiper or whatever. So I think we have to be somewhat cautious in interpreting pictures that people draw.
Right. Yeah.
But isn't that what's used in the MMPI?
No, I think you're thinking about the Rorschach maybe, which is so the Rorschach are the ones with the pictures and you
No. When we come on the police department, they make us take a psychological exam and it's the Minnesota multi-phase exam. And in there, they make us draw three diagrams, three drawings. They give us a topic and they tell us to draw this. And then the department psychologist looks over the drawings and makes some kind of determination about you.
Well, and let me just say that I don't know. So the MMPI is a paper and pencil true false test.
Right.
So there may be something else as part of that police evaluation that involves drawings, but the MMPI would not involve drawings.
Right. They're just looking to see if you're center of the road because they particularly ask you the same questions over and over again and just worded slightly differently.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, there's a lot, one of the reasons that MMPI is given so often, and it's probably the most used personality assessment in the world, is because there are validity scales in that. And part of that is you're testing, is this person telling the truth? Are they faking good? Are they faking bad? So there are some questions that are the same, but slightly worded differently, and some odd questions and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But no drawings on the MPI. That's something else.
Well, I said it that way because it's done immediately after you take the MMPI.
Yeah.
Right. I remember that. So this is a super chat question. Question to all. Do you think Cassie was not aware of what was happening because maybe she would have turned him into law enforcement right away? So this is about his sister. So this person is saying, do you think that Brian Laundrie's sister was not aware of what was happening because maybe she would have turned him in right away? Now, when I read this, I thought maybe he meant Gabby, but this is referring to his sister. You know, we don't know these people, and we have to just base it on what we see in the news. So it's a very difficult thing for us to draw a conclusion on what, you know, on their goodness level. So that's the best way I could put it without trying to sound technical. It would just be guesswork on all of our behalfs. And I don't think it's good to do that, you know, because we don't really know what these people are like. We will come to hear about it in the future, I'm sure. There was one or two really good ones. I want to just reach back and grab them. Okay, here's a super chat one. I'm going to grab this and then go back up. Sherilyn sends in a $5 super chat, and thank you for being a channel member. I've seen schizophrenic people draw the most amazing, beautiful drawings I've ever seen, and others just outlandishly evil things. Now, I want to just add on to this, Doc, is I have a nephew who loves skull bones and all like these kind of deathly looking things, but he's the kindest, sweetest kid. He's got tattoos all over him, but he's loving. He's successful in his business. But if you saw some of his social media posts and some of the drawings that he actually has done, you would just be like, ooh. But so it just piggybacks on your point of, you know, you can't really judge somebody by the drawings and the things. If it's
one piece
right.
of a very large puzzle. And I
Right.
think the hard part of that, as we already talked about, is when we know the ending. It's very difficult not to go back and kind of go, okay, this means this, this means this, this means this, and create this narrative that all fits together. Some of it may fit together, but you're absolutely right. And I appreciate the comment for your
Chatter.
viewer who was talking about the fact, your chatter who was talking about the fact that, you know, art and mental illness has a very complicated relationship. For sure.
Absolutely. Hey, Ed, this one is, I think we covered this already, but Charlie Boy 52, who's a great supporter and a subscriber, he said, will the parents be questioned about their knowledge if it's confirmed to be Brian?
Well, again, they lawyered up. So without the lawyer's permission, they're not going to be questioned. In addition, hey, Ron, there's another couple of questions out there that I'd like to address, if you don't mind.
Please.
Okay. So I see in the chat that they keep asking, if this body doesn't turn out to be Brian, what could happen to the evidence that the mother contaminated and mother picked up and so forth and so on? And that's a great question. If this is not Brian, and it turns out that that is in fact Brian's bag and stuff like that, and it's brought into the case, it's going to be something that the law enforcement is going to have to answer out. In terms of, remember, it's not a defense attorney's job to prove their client innocent. It's just to create reasonable doubt.
Right.
So the weakest chain in these criminal investigations is the crime scene work. And if you can punch holes through the crime scene work here and make the law enforcement officers, investigators look incompetent, then that is in fact what could happen here, because she should not have been allowed to touch that item at all. She should have. There should have been the law enforcement officer with her at all times. And then even if they did separate for whatever reason, they should have been instructed. Look, if you find something, don't touch it. Come get us, and we'll deal with it. And none of that occurred.
Right. And look who's here in the chat. Our criminal defense attorney, Joe Murray. And I would be frightened to give him a link to come up and join us, because I'm only saying that to be cute, but we love Joe Murray. He gives the great aspect and the side from a criminal defense attorney's mind. But that's not what the show is about. This is, we got a couple of things to cover, and we're just about wrapping it up. A minute and 10 minutes minute and 10 seconds into this, a minute and 10. Wait, yeah, 110. So I want to just focus quickly on some rapid fire questions for you, Ed. Again, the all of the activity that we saw today at this reserve, the Carlton Reserve, the extensive searches there. What is, and this is a common question, and I like to get this out of the way. What's your thoughts on why the Northport Police Department, FBI, concentrated their efforts in these reserves? People are so up in arms about money being spent. He's in the Appalachians. He's outside of the country. Why do you think the police department has concentrated their efforts in these reserves? And now we have a recovery that potentially could be Brian Laundrie. What's your thoughts on that, Ed?
Because historically, the FBI has learned over time in many criminal investigations that when people are on the run, they go to places they know and that are comfortable in. Okay. And they'll try to stick it out there, just like Eric Robert Rudolph up in the woods in the Carolinas. And, you know, he knew those woods, he knew those areas. That's what he was comfortable with. He was able to hide out there for years before he was finally caught. So it's pretty much the same thing here. This was the last known location. They knew he liked this location. He knew all about it like the back of his hand. So that he probably knew it well better than them, and they went looking for him there, and they had strong belief to do so, and they were right.
Yeah, and we know this too.
Well, they will be right if this body comes back to him.
Correct. But we also know from Investigation 101. We would say it'd be in the middle of a housing development in, say, East New York and Brownsville, where there's shootings a dime a dozen in the 90s. I remember several times being a responding officer securing a crime scene, as we see the tape up on the overhead shot today with the recovery of the remains. I'm standing at the crime scene tape. There's an audience behind me, and then a call comes into 911. The shooter is right behind the officer standing there. And I made an arrest that way. I mean, took the person into custody, positive identification, because they want to come back to places that they're comfortable, and they were comfortable with their surroundings in the housing developments over there. There was nowhere else for him to go, and he came back to the scene of the crime. And you know what, Brian? If this in fact turns out to be him, he murdered Gabby in the wilderness, and now his demise comes into the wilderness, and it just goes hand in hand with what you just said.
When I had large crime scenes with people outside watching, the first photos I always took was the crowd, and I would give that to the detectives just in case that perp was standing there watching us. Okay. Now there's another question that keeps coming up about the mother touching this backpack and the evidence, and the question is whether it's considered cross-contaminated or tainted, and absolutely. It's a hole in the investigation. Should this not be Brian's body, and they eventually find him and try to prosecute him, it's a hole in the case that they're going to have to answer out. Absolutely.
Hey, Doc, any thoughts on criminals visiting the crime scene, coming back? You have any studies on that?
We know it happens, and it happens more often than we would imagine. I mean, the common sense would say stay away, right? Stay away from the crime scene. But there's some pretty good research that suggests that a significant minority of criminals do revisit the crime scene. And that can be for a number of different reasons. I mean, there was a serial killer recently who set fire to a woman in a barn and then came back to watch the firefighters put it out. So we know that it happens. And I think it happens because sometimes there's a thrill associated with it. I think sometimes it's reliving the crime. There's all kinds of reasons psychologically why somebody might do that. But I'm often amazed because you're right. Common sense would say, stay away.
Yeah. Again, here's one of the, this isn't even a question. This is a statement. Psychological abuse is a part of the abuse cycle. That's how the abuser is able to normalize the abuse.
100%. That is such an important comment and observation to make. I mean, oftentimes domestic violence or intimate personal violence starts with psychological abuse. And we also know that it tends to escalate into something more. And we also know that rarely is there just one form of abuse. if there's psychological abuse, it tends to progress to physical abuse. And if it's physical abuse, there still tends to be psychological abuse. So they go hand in hand, and one often starts and the other follows.
So it's a vicious cycle. It is a vicious cycle. And, we need more education on this stuff. And I'm going to talk more about domestic violence in the future and ways to keep yourself safe. I'm also going to have a domestic violence specialist come on from the New York City Police Department and give some handy tips to ladies and gentlemen that are out there, because it doesn't just happen to women, it happens to men too, but the majority are victims are women, unfortunately. I'm going to wrap it up, guys. I'm going to link down below in the description my guest tonight. I implore you to go over and check out her LinkedIn profile. You have Twitter and Facebook and all of that stuff.
I do.
All right. So we're going to link all of the great doctors' social media down below in the description. Let me know in the chat what you thought of, and in the comments what you thought of my guest. Ed Wallace is a co-host. He's on board with us. He can't leave because I have handcuffs over here to the left, and I will whip them out, and he will not be able to leave. Doc, any parting words for the audience?
I just want to say thank you, Ron. I love your show, as you know, and so it was an honor to be on that. And I also want to really thank all of the viewers and chatters for coming on and being so supportive. And I loved all the interesting comments and questions that you had. So thank you for including me and making me feel welcome. I really appreciate it.
And Doc, you're quite welcome. It's an honor and it's an honor and a privilege for me to have somebody with your experience on my show. It just does nothing but enhance it. So thank you. If you subscribe to my channel as I subscribe to yours, you'd be able to go into the comment section and engage with the audience after the conversation. So maybe you guys, if you leave some comments for the great doctor down below in the comment section, you might be surprised, because she might do like Ed Wallace does and answer you from time to time. I know she's got a busy schedule, so I'm not trying to put you back against the wall, but maybe you could leave some questions, comments to the questions.
I definitely would.
Thank you, Doc. Ed, any final words?
No, I want to thank the doctor again for coming on the show tonight and being a part of our audience. And it was great discussion going back and forth, and a lot of good questions. The audience is very sharp, I got to tell you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed. And I'm going to go full screen with me. And I want to just say this to everybody. Listen, over time, we're going to hear a lot of speculation on Facebook and some of the social media platforms. There's going to be people who are going to try to sell you a bowl of soup and try to tell you this is Brian that they recovered, and this is this, and this is that. Wait for official notification from the authorities. And I can't overemphasize the importance of this. Do not listen to late night folks that are just blabbing about things and have no knowledge of what's going on. This is an active investigation. It has to go through the process. It has to be, everything has to check out. So before we start drawing conclusions, let's just keep an open mind into this. And until we get official notification, just stay away from that. But as I like to end all of my lives, I'm going to go back with everybody. God bless the world. God bless the United States of America, and God bless each and every one of us here in the chat, and all victims of crime and their family, but especially tonight, Gabby Petito's family, the Petitos and Schmidt family. They need us now more than ever. Please, please be positive. Send them prayers, send them positive vibes. They're all over social media. They need us now more than ever. Guys, I will see you on the next one. Thank you to my guests, and we will talk soon. Peace from New York. Thank you.